Ira, tell me your first recollections of meeting Hank Greenberg.
Well, I met Hank Greenberg in about 1969 or 70, and I went to do an article on him, and we met in a hotel dining room at the Roosevelt Hotel, and I remember such presence. I mean, he was. Well, I remember Shirley Povich once described Hank Greenberg, and this was fitting when I met him. And Shirley said that Hank was the perfect standard bearer for Jews. He was smart, he was proud, and he was big. And I met him, and he still had dark hair, some gray. He was in his early 70s, maybe mid 60s, and his hair was slicked back. He had a lot of hair, and he was 6'4", a little hunched over now, but big and well dressed and imposing. And here was the great Hank Greenberg that I had not seen him play. My earliest memories of baseball were about the end of his career in 1947, but I had family members talk about Hank Greenberg, from a Jewish family, and they tell me legendary stories about Hank Greenberg, some true, some not, but anyway, I grew up with legend of Hank Greenberg.
But you developed a relationship with him to the point where how did that come about?
Well, so we sat down to have lunch, and I said to him, Hank, I know this is a cliche question. You're always asked this, but before we do anything else, I just want to get it out of the way. Did they pitch to you in 1938 when you were going for Babe Ruth's hallowed home run record? It was 1938. He had 58 home runs with 5 games to go. The record was 60, of course. And when you say hallowed, it was only 11 years old, So he said, let me tell you something. He said, I know people like to say that I was Jewish, and so they didn't want to pitch. The pitchers didn't want to pitch to me. He said, it's bunk. It's not true. He said, in those 5 games, he said, I was feeling tense. There was so much pressure on me, and I hit a lot of long balls. Some were caught, some were foul, and I got a number of hits, 5 or more hits. One St. Louis Browns pitcher was a rookie. He was intimidated, and so he walked me a couple of times, but otherwise, no. He said, I remember the Browns near the end of the season, and they had a first baseman named McQueen, and he was my friend. And I remember I had 2 strikes, and I hit a pop foul, and he dropped it on purpose so I could get another at bat. Okay, and then I had McGowan was an umpire who was my friend. He was behind the plate, and I hit a triple, or it was a triple. And then the third base coach was holding me up like this, and I said, I have a chance to get a home run. I had 56 home runs, and the throw came in, and Hank, as he described it, he was out by 5 fat feet. His friend McGowan, the umpire, called him safe. So he said, look, it's a canard that they weren't pitching to me, and that I got a lot of breaks. There were a lot of people, a lot of guys who were my friends. They wanted me to break the record, including a lot of my teammates, but it didn't happen. And then through the years, we continued a friendship, and he became a source for me. That if something was happening in sports, I would call him, either on the record or off the record, and he would give me his opinion. And then when Bill Veeck died, and Bill Veeck was one of his closest friends, and I called Hank. I was doing a column for the Times, New York Times, on Veeck and what he meant and so forth, and I called Hank, and he gave me some opinions and views on Veeck, and I sent him the column, and he wrote me a letter back, and he said, Ira, you were the only sports writer in the country to call me about Bill Veeck. And you would think that, he would have a slew of dozens calling him. And he said, and then he gave me like a Latin phrase, time flies, and people forget the past. I don't exactly remember it, but he was literate, He was an autodidact. He went to one semester of college, and then he signed with the Tigers in 1929, I think, and or 28. And but he read widely, and he liked to argue political opinions, and he was always fun to be with.
And from reading the book, he was a very highly principled man and was very much willing to take a stand. You know, with contracts, with even as a rookie, he walked off the field.
Yeah.
You know, when because he wasn't playing, he was frustrated. How did that approach help him withstand the abuse and the verbal abuse and things that he had to put up with?
Hank had confidence in himself, and he was big, and he was strong, and he was talented, and but he was smart, and he was probably as smart as anybody in baseball, including the owners, and he knew what his talents were, and if his talents weren't perceived by the manager or the coaches or the general managers, well, he took a stand, and in essence, hey, look at me, look what I can do, and it turned out to be the way he would take his stands. Years later, he was now in his late 70s, no, maybe late 60s. He went to a restaurant with his son Steve, and this is emblematic of Hank the man. And a waiter comes over, and Hank orders a martini with 3 small olives. And so the waiter goes, and he brings back the martini, and there's 1 big olive in the martini. And he says to the waiter, I asked for 3 small olives, and you give me 1 big olive. And the waiter says something to him, and Hank gets furious and says something very negative to the waiter, who turns and runs away. And Steve says, Dad, that was unlike you. Why would you say something like that to the waiter? He said, well, I told him about the 3 olives that weren't right. We got one big olive. And he said, I refuse to apologize. And Steve said, no, Dad. What he said was, I profusely apologize. but the thing is, he's standing up even for the olives, you know. And this was Hank.
But did he share with you though what it was like for him to be that kind of an icon in that day where he was revered by a symbol for Jews everywhere, but on the same side he's also the object of a lot of vitriol, including at a World Series that took place here in Chicago,
right.
35 Cubs.
Right, and some of the Cubs were thrown out of the game from the dugout. They were razzing him in 1935. In 1938, when he was going to break the record, for quite a while, you know, he was the Jewish superstar in baseball. And wherever he went, Jews congregated around him and inviting him to dinners, and he appreciated all that. But after a while, he didn't want to be known early on as a Jewish baseball player. He wanted to be known as a baseball player and to be appreciated for his merits as a ball player. But as time went on, and he began to understand and realize his significance to the Jewish community, and in 1938, when the Jews were having such in the 30s, having such a tough time in Europe, and particularly in Germany, of course, he said that, and he was also being reviled often from fans in the stands, and he said that every time that I hit a home run, it was a home run against Hitler, because Jews were supposed to be smaller, weaker, and not able to take care of themselves. And here is this great sports hero who was not only just hitting singles and doubles, but hitting home runs.